Hi, and welcome back to Ronnie the Reader. I am really excited about today's video. We are going to be discussing the thriller author Ruth Ware, who has released 9 books up until the recording and publishing of this video. I think she has a new one coming out later this year, which is actually potentially a sequel to one of the books we are going to be discussing today. So that is exciting for some people. Not me, though. Spoiler alert for that particular book if you know the sequel that's coming out. So, yeah, we're going to be discussing all 9 of her books today in brief. I'm not going over super long, in depth reviews on each, just a little bit about kind of the plot and what it's about, some of the themes maybe, and then a little bit about what I thought, and then finally we are going to be doing a ranking of her books at the end of this video. So if you are excited for that, stick around, and at the end of this video, make sure to leave a comment on your ranking or your favorite Ruth Ware or what you like about her books, and we can kind of chat about that below. But without further ado, let's jump into the book descriptions and then we'll get into the ranking after that. So, Ruth Ware's first published mystery thriller that everyone was kind of talking about is In a Dark, Dark Wood, which came out in 2015. And this follows a woman named Nora who goes on a bachelorette trip with some friends into this like isolated house in the woods. And I think there's like a bunch of like glass panes. Like the house is really see through, if I remember correctly. It's during the winter, so it's super snowy, and there's a couple of women there, as long as along with some other kind of periphery characters. So this one was fine for me. It was the first Ruth Ware that I read. I believe I gave it 3 stars, and I listened to it as an audiobook. And something that unfortunately does not always jive with me personally about Ruth Ware is the audiobook narrator that does her books. I just tend to find the way that the narrator reads the books to become very agitating and grating and make the characters very grating in a way that they're not necessarily supposed to be. Now, I have not listened to all of Ruth Ware's books via audiobook. I do believe it's the same narrator. And there are other challenges that I've had with books that I did not listen to the audiobook with. So it's not like it's solely the audiobook narrator's fault that I didn't enjoy some of these, but it definitely became a challenge within A Dark Dark Wood. But I did proceed to push through, and I did read another Ruth Ware, not the next one published though, but we are going to be jumping into that one. So the next published Ruth Ware book was The Woman in Cabin 10, which came out in 2016. This follows a woman who is actually attacked in her apartment, and then she proceeds to go on this like cruise, and she thinks that she sees someone die and go overboard, and she kind of starts this investigation. I absolutely hated this book when I read it, and honestly, if I'm being honest, I don't even remember why. I listened to it as an audiobook. Like I said, it was not the next book after In a Dark Dark Wood that I read. It was the third one. I actually read the following release before I read The Woman in Cabin 10. But I just remember hating The Woman in Cabin 10 and thinking all of the decisions that our main character were making were dumb and pointless and didn't make sense to me. And I also remember that the twist in the book I also found to kind of just be unrealistic or not believable from the context of the story that we had already been reading. And I believe that this is, I don't know, I haven't looked on Goodreads, but I think this is Ruth Ware's most popular book. And this is the book that I alluded to earlier that I think is getting a sequel this year. And I just never found the love for it. I didn't get the hype, didn't get the love. It just was not my thing. But if you like it, I'm more than happy for you. But I just personally was not on that train with y'all. Ruth Ware's following release is the one that I read second, like I mentioned, and that is The Lying Game. And this one was a 3.5 star for me. It's following 4 friends from boarding school that are kind of they've all gone their separate ways. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe our main character receives like a letter or something that is kind of insinuating someone knows what she and her friends maybe did in the past, and then they all go to this like isolated kind of cabin. It's another one of those, like, I think they're like still near a town or so. But this one doesn't stick out in my mind. I don't remember too much, so it just didn't stick out fully to me. And I could see progressions in Ruth Ware's writing. I really wish that I would have ended up reading these in the publication order, but at the time, as I was listening to them as audiobooks, my library just I ended up getting The Lion Game before I got The Woman in Cabin 10, so I listened to that one first. But I do think to give Ruth Ware some merit, obviously because she is a strong author, and there are books on this list later on that I really, really loved and enjoyed by her. But these first three, you can see the progression for sure in her writing style. But I just think a struggle that Ruth Ware always has is not necessarily landing the twist of the story. So that's something to kind of keep in mind if you're just jumping into Ruth Ware. And if you've read a lot of Ruth Ware, let me know if you agree with that because I've seen kind of that same sentiment online other places. So I'm just curious kind of how others feel about the progression of her works and how the twists usually land with them. Now we are getting into really the golden era of Ruth Ware for me at least, and I think a lot of people with her next release, which was in 2018, which is The Death of Mrs. Westaway. This is more of a gothic kind of atmosphere. We're following a character named, oh gosh, I can't not remember her name, and I just looked it up right before this video, but I will kind of put it on the screen. But we're following a main character who receives a letter saying that she is entitled to this inheritance after like a long lost relative essentially passes away. The only issue with this is that this person that we are following, our main character, is not actually the person who was supposed to be inheriting this money. So it's really kind of fascinating. She decides to end up going with it, and she ends up living in this kind of gothic, like I mentioned, styled manor or house. And it's really fun. It's really exciting. This one really is kind of a fast paced, kind of super interesting, intriguing, and just dark book that I really liked. And this is the first Ruth Ware book that I read physically and did not listen to as an audiobook. So I think a lot of my enjoyment of this one came from that aspect of the book of reading it physically and not listening to it as an audiobook. And I definitely recommend, to do that if you don't jive with the audiobook narrator, really in any case, but especially for the Ruth Ware books. I think reading them physically can definitely help you a lot. Ruth Ware's next book is my personal favorite of the books, and that is The Turn of the Key. And this one came out in 2019. It's a retelling of The Turn of the Screw. So it's kind of, a classic or a modern take on a classic tale. And we are following a woman who essentially is hired to be a nanny for these girls at this house. It's like a futuristic smart house kind of situation. But the whole kind of time, we are realizing that this woman potentially did something very bad and is now writing a letter to a defense lawyer to defend her in court after being accused of a crime. The way that this particular book ends is just so good and just leaves you mind blown, and definitely, definitely, I think is where Ruth Ware has peaked. I don't know if she's gotten to this high of a high before or since after this book, so I am disappointed. This one I do really love. It's one of the two that I own, along with The Death of Mrs. Westaway, a book that I think is definitely worth visiting. I think if you pick out one book from this pile that you probably will really like, it is The Turn of the Key, but others disagree. Others really enjoy some other different Ruth Wares. But personally, I think this is her best work. I think it's the best twist. I think it's the most fast paced. I think it has the most interesting setting. It's still kind of an isolated mystery, but it has an interesting take with the smart house twist and kind of seemingly being haunted a little bit. It has that kind of gothic, like paranormal esque to it. So it's just really good. Ruth Ware's next release in 2020 was One by One. And I remember being super excited for this book. It's a kind of locked room mystery about these coworkers who go on a ski trip and then kind of get snowed in. Like a snowstorm hits, they're snowed in, they're stuck at this ski lodge, and then they start dying one by one. So it's a classic kind of Agatha Christie, and then there were none retelling kind of situation. And this one just didn't totally work for me because I feel like the twist ending is kind of obvious. And while some people really like that, I personally didn't. I know that a lot of people really, really enjoyed this when it came out. And I think I was maybe, I don't know if I was really in the minority. I don't remember exactly where the majority of people fell as far as liking versus disliking, and not even disliking. I didn't dislike this book. I thought it was a fun ride still. I just was a little disappointed in the ending and it kind of being a little bit obvious. as to what happened and where we were going and what the story was ultimately about. All right, next we have The It Girl, which is her 2022 release. If I'm being honest, besties, and I always am in these videos, I DNF'd the It Girl. It is following Hannah, who is kind of part of a group of friends from Oxford, and the story was told in two different timelines. Things that I really typically enjoy: multiple timelines, a close group of friends, a secret kind of bonding them all, but ultimately, it just was boring, it was long, I made it, like, 45 or 50% of the way through, and I couldn't tell you a single thing that happened in this book. I just found it boring and uninteresting, and I do wanna return to it one day just so that way I can say I did finish it and I've read all of Ruth Ware's books, but there's nothing pulling me to it. I didn't hear really anyone talk about this book when it was released. It seemed like no one thought it was that good or that impressive. I haven't read reviews on Goodreads, so I'm sure it has 5 and 4 star reviews that really praise it, but I just was not a fan of this one and ultimately didn't bother finishing it. The follow up to The It Girl was 0 Days, and this one is following a couple who's like a kind of break-in artist, I guess. I forget what they call them in the book, but essentially they are hired by a company to like break into this company to kind of see where the weak points are. And we kind of jump into the action with our main character completing one of these tasks. And then, as she's on her way home, her husband is like brutally murdered. And she is not framed, but the police think that she did it. And she's like our main suspect. And it kind of turns into like a spy on the run thriller, and ultimately just didn't work for me. It was a 2 star when I finished it. I thought that it just was once again a little boring. It definitely dragged. This one doesn't have traditional chapter breaks, which is already going to be hard for me. It's just one of those things as a reader that I don't enjoy non traditional chapter breaks. I don't enjoy kind of a stream of conscious narrative. We have breaks in the story, sure. They're broken down into like days and timestamps, but they were just far too long for me to really just care, honestly. I enjoy a quicker, snappier kind of chapter that really leaves me wanting more and wanting to know what happens next. And some people might find that a little bit, you know, easy or cheesy or, kind of shorthand for I can't write an interesting story, so I'm going to kind of end each chapter on like a cliffhanger. And not that I'm necessarily looking for that, but I just kind of want the story to always feel like it's progressing. And there were some passages of this book where I was reading because I listened to it as an audiobook and had the ebook for some of it as well to kind of go back and forth because once again, the audiobook narrator doesn't always work for me. So I was trying to read it physically, and it just wasn't what I was looking for. It's not something that I found to be that good, to be honest. I just thought it wasn't written that well and it was boring and uninteresting. The premise is really cool. I think a kind of spy thriller is a fun thing to do, but just wasn't fully successful. And then finally, we are getting to One Perfect Couple, which was released just last year in 2024. And this one is following a couple who joins a reality dating show, and then it turns into more of a disaster thriller. The island where they're staying at gets hit by a big storm, and they're kind of stuck and stranded there. And eventually, people start dying, and it turns into a thriller, but it has more of those kind of disaster survival elements. And this one worked for me. While the spy thriller aspect of 0 Days I was not into, I really enjoyed the disaster aspect of One Perfect Couple. I thought we didn't need the reality show conceit to it. I thought we could have just kind of had our couples going on like a couples cruise and get stranded or something of that nature. I thought it was a little convoluted to get all of our participants to where they needed to be in the story. And some of the other issues I had with the story was kind of characteristics or characterization feeling not consistent. But ultimately, this was fun. It was a 3.5 star read for me. So definitely something that I enjoyed from Ruth Ware, which hasn't really happened in a while. So I was happy to read this. I read it physically from my library earlier this year and had fun with it. All right, so that was a really quick synopsis and review of all of Ruth Ware's books that have been published up to this point. So now I want to do a quick ranking of her books to kind of let you know where they fall for me personally. So, number nine, falling in the last place spot, should not be a shock. It is the It Girl, which is the only one on this list that I DNF'd and did not finish. So, that one is last for me. Coming in the number eight spot, we're going to have to go with 0 Days. Just one that I found uninspired and boring. Interesting premise, but then was going on that really made me care. Number seven, I'm going with The Woman in Cabin 10, which I never thought would be dethroned as my least favorite Ruth Ware because I absolutely hated this book. But looking back, I think it has stronger merits in it than 0 Days. I think the interesting mystery is just enough to kind of keep it afloat. And it has a more interesting setting of kind of being locked on this boat. That was cool. That was fun. Coming in the number six spot, we have In a Dark, Dark Wood. This one, just, I read it so long ago, it was kind of cliched and generic at the time. I mean, it's her first mystery thriller, so it's, not going to be like the most special thing in the world. It's fun, it's good, it's fine, but nothing that I really, really would kind of go back to in the future. Coming in at number five, we have The Lion Game. Once again, a perfectly fine book, perfectly acceptable. It was fun. It was exciting, but just doesn't stick in my mind. So kind of falls middle of the road of the list. Number four is One by One. While I was disappointed with the ending of this one, it's just a fun ride all the way through and has tropes that I just find to be more exciting in a mystery. This one I definitely would be intrigued to give a reread and see how I felt going in, knowing ultimately how it ends. I just the first time around thought it was a little too obvious, but knowing how it ends, it could be a fun reread, like how a lot of scary movies are kind of a fun rewatch when you know the ending and kind of know the killer situation. Number three, which is a little surprising, is One Perfect Couple. Similar to the One by One book, this one has more of a kind of isolated one place setting, kind of stuck by a storm situation, but kind of the opposite end, whereas One by One is like a snowstorm. Obviously, One Perfect Couple is more of a tropical kind of mystery, and we're stranded by a like cyclone type storm. So this one was fun. Like I said, I don't think we needed the reality show kind of conceit to get our characters where they needed to be, but I really, really loved the kind of just fun ride there was after we kind of really got into the story. It takes a little bit to get there for sure, but once you are there, it is a lot of fun. Coming in at number two is going to be The Death of Mrs. Westaway, a super gothic, dark story that is just kind of teeming with um, really rich writing and really pretty visuals in the book. I love kind of a gothic setting. It's always fun to be in like an old manor with kind of this rich family that's kind of awful people, but it's fun to kind of read about. So this one comes in at number two spot. And number one is The Turn of the Key. The kind of haunted, modern element of this book is really fun, and the twist is really surprising and really shocking. I don't think I talked too much about the twist when I was going through this book itself, but it's one that is just so fun and kind of really comes out of nowhere and really leaves you heartbroken. This is one of the only books on this list that I really, really cared about our characters and what was going to happen with them at the end of the story. So ultimately, it is number one on the list. All right, and that is everything. Please let me know what you think of Ruth Ware's books and your rankings. The comments will be commenting down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you would like. Share the video even if you have some big Ruth Ware fans in your life. And until next time, I will see you then. Thank you so much for watching.